So yeah, I am joined today with the lovely Jemma Robinson, debut author, and we're just going to have a really lovely conversation about your writing journey, your publishing journey, and how it is to be an author, what you've got going on, what you've got to look forward to. But what's particularly going to be really lovely is to just kind of hear more about where the beginnings of the stars that guide you home kind of came from. So we're kind of interested what research you had to do, if there was any at all.
There was research, like, because it's my own world. I kind of took a few creative what's the word, leniencies. But there was certain aspects of it that I wanted to kind of be historically accurate, namely the medical side of it, because obviously one of the main characters is a doctor. So I wanted to kind of know the medicines that were used in like Tudor times, which I think is where it's predominantly based if you were to base it in like a real world sense. And the the other was the torture aspect. So my internet history was very interesting for a while, but again, if you're gonna do it, you want to make sure that you're hitting the mark with how things were back then. So yeah, I had some interesting internet history.
I bet. Do you know, mine's very interesting in this role as well, because I'm constantly researching and whatever submission. So with that said, what was potentially the hardest scene or some of the hardest scenes to write about? Were there any? Or
there's one, I think I've said this on other podcasts, there's one particular chapter from Edmund's point of view which was hard anyway, because you're getting into his head, because he's not very nice, obviously, and you know, at that point in time he's being not very nice to one of my favorite characters. So it's kind of getting into the head, but also trying not to make him too like pantomime villainish kind of. You've got to draw that fine line between him being like evil and not being like pantomime evil. But like just being in his head, that was definitely the hardest scene for characterization purposes and for the fact that it's not a very nice kind of scene. So I think that was definitely the hardest kind of part, right?
I guess it's like the psychology of literally getting your mindset into someone that's capable of causing such atrocities and things.
Well, I mean, because he's not nice, and he's not a nice person anyway, just in general. But you've got the added thing on top of that he's kind of now got his hands on the man who's kind of, you know, his wife is in love with. So it's kind of this is his like one chance to kind of be evil, and he takes it. So it's that was definitely hard.
No, I can imagine. And I guess, would you describe that as probably one of the harder parts of your writing process, sort of getting into that mindset, if you like?
Yeah, because I write from character point of view, so definitely if you've got to get into the mindset of a character who's not very nice, you've kind of got to see it from their point of view, because that's, even if like you're like, oh no, boo, go away, you're really mean, you've kind of got to see it from their point of view. So it's like being uncharacteristically evil.
Which isn't like you at all, Jem.
No. People are surprised when they're like, one of my friends said, like, she'd been reading it and she messaged me and she was like, beneath that happy-go-lucky exterior, you have a very dark side. I was like, but yeah, I mean, I like to create empathy with the reader, and then if someone, you know, if you commit the character to someone that they're going to care about anyway, if something's happening to that character, then there's the empathy there, and then obviously it makes you want to carry on reading to hope that these people get their happy ending. So it's
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I think particularly with the way that you write in your character development, I, as a reader, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, people get really invested in those characters. And I can see, and you will have seen from the reviews that you get, you know, people just need more and more and more of these characters, because because you get to know them so well in their personalities, and you're invested in their story and what they do. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I definitely, I think that's it. And a lot of my friends say I leave a lot of things on cliffhangers, which is quite true, but it's kind of, you want people to carry on reading.
Yeah.
And you want to give them the payoff at the end, so that's important as well. So especially with a book like mine, where there is a lot of heartache and getting to that point, you kind of want to keep reading, because like, you know, please be a happy ending.
It's like, does it get any better? Yeah, absolutely. But kind of on that note, so in terms of the like the inspiration for the book, where did that all start?
Well, when I loved history at school. Like, that was one of my favorite subjects, and I tried to take it to A level, but there wasn't enough kings and queens. I loved kings and queens and all that type of thing, and there wasn't enough of that at A level, so I didn't end up carrying on with it. But I loved history, and in particular kings and queens, and especially that period of like Henry VIII and all that type of thing. I was really fascinated by that, and so to that level, I watched The Tudors, which was on a good few years ago.
Yes, yeah.
And with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Jeremy Northam and so many people. There's so many people in it, but I watched that because I was like, oh, I'll enjoy this because this is the era that I like.
Yes.
So I watched that, and I really found the relationship between Henry VIII and Sir Thomas More. I found that fascinating, because here's this guy that he kind of trusts, but maybe this guy doesn't particularly agree with everything that Henry's doing. So he's kind of like battling with himself to say, well, I don't want to mess with him because I know what he's capable of, but at the same point, I don't necessarily agree with what he's doing. And I thought that was quite a fascinating kind of thing to explore, is that what if there's this confidant of the king who's known him since he was a young child, and has always hoped that he'd grow up into this, wonderful kind of leader, slowly realizing that perhaps he's not that man, and maybe he will have to do something about it. So I think that was where the inspiration came from. And then it was kind of like, how do you do that? And then that's where the love story came from. So the love story was secondary to this relationship between James and the king, and it was like, what do you put in there to kind of make him see? And this was kind of like the perfect thing, really, to make him finally realize that maybe the king's not so decent after all.
That's it. Yeah, taking those rose tinted glasses off a little bit. But I'm not going to spoil it for anyone that hasn't read it, but it's an amazing plot. And to be honest, I reckon, to be honest, James was one of my favorite characters in it. Really, a lot of
people say that.
Yeah, very complex character, and I think the clever thing with The Stars That Guide You Home is you've got obviously that main plot. Maybe it's the love story for some people, maybe it's the friendship between, I don't know, any of them really, but then you've also got the underlying plots as well, and that's what's really lovely, because it's love, friendship, hate, it's everything, isn't it?
And James is that kind of neutral character who, when you're seeing it from his point of view, you're seeing it from a neutral perspective, really, because obviously if you're looking at it from Sophia or Tom's point of view, you've got their point of view, or if you're looking from it from Edmund's point of view, you've got his, and then you've got James, who's kind of in the middle and trying to work it out and do the right thing, but at the same point he's a man that doesn't want to lose his head. So he's
No.
like, he's got to be careful himself, because
Yeah.
he's protective of his own life, really. So
That's it.
it's an interesting theme.
Dynamic, definitely is. And the title for the book, where did that come from?
That came from my friend Cassie, who we used to go to her house, have something to eat, and then we'd sit outside, have a drink in the summer and like under the stars and stuff like that. And then just one day she said that she had been listening to a song, and this is when I should research before I I'm gonna find which song it is and let you know, because bear with me.
No, that's okay. So it kind of just came to you on a whim.
It was Cassie more than anything. Who said about this song, Kiss the Rain by Billy Myers. It's quite an old song, but there's a line in it that says, keep in mind we're under the same skies and the night is, and it's like that. And it was kind of like that song. She said, you need to write a scene where you get those lyrics in or something like that. So then I wrote the scene where there's a scene in there where that is mentioned about being under, even if people aren't together, being under the same sky and knowing that that person's thinking about that person. And then it just came from there, really. It was like, oh, that'd be a great kind of way into a title, which was to say that they will guide you home, really, and whatever home classes as, whether it's this other person or an actual home, or so.
No, well, it was amazing, because I know when at the very beginning of your publishing journey, manuscripts and titles changed, but yours was submitted to us and we just loved it so much. We were like, we couldn't possibly even look at changing that, because it's such a wonderful title, and it fits perfectly with the book. Now, from your writing, from your experience, what is probably the best advice you've been given about writing from anybody, really? Like, has it been quite a learning curve for you, or?
Well, I've written for years, but I've always written for myself, kind of like an anxiety release kind of thing. I never really let anyone read it, so it was kind of like my own little thing. And I always used to write fan fiction, which I still do. I still write fan fiction, because not the dodgy kind. There is a dodgy kind. I don't write that. But because I never felt that I could create my own kind of characters or worlds or anything like that. So with fan fiction, it's easy, because those characters and those worlds already exist. It's just you're creating a new story for them. And then I just slowly started letting my friends, Cassie, read so many of my friends have read it, like Jane, Cassie, Isla, lots of friends have read it. But it was Cassie who actually said, this is really good. And I actually mentioned to her, well, I've got an idea for an original novel. And she went, do it, just write it, go on, just write it.
Do it.
And that wasn't this one, actually. This was the second one that I've written. The one that I wrote before it. And it just kind of went from there. So I think for me, it was someone saying, no, this is actually really good. You need to try and push yourself, and you're so good at writing characters, that why can't you create your own and create your own worlds and stuff like that. So it kind of came from there, really.
And it's having that confidence from someone else, and believing in your work, isn't it? I think that's
definitely. And again, for myself, it's a case of I don't write in the right order. If I've got an idea, I'll stick it in, and then I'll be like, well, I'll find a way to get from this to this, because this is staying in. And it's kind of like, so I always say to people, if you've got an idea, it doesn't matter if it's like the start of an idea or the end of an idea. I've often written the end of stuff before I've written the start, because then again, you know where it's going. So there's like,
Yeah,
if you're determined enough, you're like, well, I will finish this because there's an ending there. So it's like,
that's
you have
it. Yeah.
push yourself to it. But I've never written in the right order, and my friends felt like it was a brand new book when they finally got to read The Stars That Guide Your
It all
Journey
in the right order.
in the right order, because I'd just go, read this, read this. It's nothing to do with the last part you read, just read it. So that when they read it all, they're like, that's where that fits in.
Yeah.
I see now.
It all makes sense now. But that's it, I think, because then, you know, we acting as your publishers and working with you very closely with editorial, and that brings us quite nicely on to sort of talking a little bit about your publishing journey, if you like, because it was a matter of, we've got to look at the book as a whole thing. And there were certain conversations that we had with yourself when we were talking about, you know, when we obviously gave you back a couple of edits, and it was that involvement from you where you said, I'm not like, I need this certain part in, or, you know, the ending a certain way. And that was a really nice way of you having control over that, and us working with you to achieve that.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
But, you know, in just so some of our readers, listeners, you know, whoever's watching, if they are writers or potentially want to look into publishing a book, can you maybe talk a little bit about your experience, or your publishing experience? I know I am your editor, but it's fine, you can say whatever you want.
No, I mean, like, this came about in lockdown. Like, I follow Pippa on Instagram, because
Yes.
I've got ME like Pippa does, and
Yeah.
I saw that obviously she'd gone through you guys, so I started kind of looking into it that way. And then I thought, it's lockdown, why the hell not just go for it, which I did. And it wasn't a finished manuscript at that point, it still needed a lot of filler bits putting in, so then I quickly got those done. It's amazing how quick you can do it if someone actually says, oh no, I actually quite like this, it's good.
Yeah.
So yeah, that happened, and then it's just been fantastic, really. There's been a lot of conversation from the very start, like even with like what colours we wanted for the front cover and stuff like that. It was all like discussed, and then with the edits especially, it was I don't know, when it's your baby, you're kind of like very protective of it. And like the first time we got it back, I could kind of see where you were going with it, but at the same point, it was what I said earlier on, which was that you want the payoff for the reader. And I didn't necessarily feel that the way that it had been ended in the first edit, you would get that payoff
feeling.
But again, you've been fantastic. You was like, right, you've got this many pages, which was good for me as well, because then it was like, right, I don't need this bit, that's just me being flowery, you know, I love it. I don't want to get rid of it, but I don't need it. So then it, you know, and then there was other parts where I could kind of say, oh no, yeah, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't need that, but I want this part in. And I was able to kind of have that real collaborative process with yourselves to and it was always really comfortable having that process. There was never a time when I felt like I couldn't ask for anything or I couldn't suggest anything. It's been fantastic, really. And I think we've got a book now that is pretty much perfect for telling the story that I wanted it to tell. So yeah,
absolutely. No, and it's been a pleasure working with you as well. And it's, you know, I think any publishing journey or journey as a writer and an author, you know, ever changing, you're ever evolving, and it's learning about yourself as a writer and an author, you know, where your give is, you know, what you're happy to look into, you know, because as you said, it is a collaboration. And it's certain parts where it was you understanding and us understanding how to make that scene or that ending, whatever it may have been, the best that it can be. And as you said, we are 100% happy with it, you know, and it ends perfectly. And it's that constant conversation, really, which obviously has produced it.
Yeah.
All its glory. But in terms of, you know, if there was a book to follow, you know, a sequel or whatever, do you feel like your writing would be slightly different this time around in terms of what you've learned from the first book? Or
I definitely say so. I definitely, having been through like the publishing and editing process, I'm a lot more aware of when I'm being flowery and perhaps not kind of needing those parts in it. And like I said, this was the second book that I'd written, so I went back and looked at my first one, and I did a lot of kind of edits and, you know, took out bits that weren't necessarily needed. So it's definitely changed my the way that I write and I think about writing now, and, you know, stopping myself from being too flowery and
be more cutthroat, like, no, don't need to,
which is hard, especially when you write from like point of view, because I enjoy writing internal monologues. That's kind of my favorite kind of thing, and sometimes I can go a little bit too long with them, and it's kind of like, no, you need to like hold it back a little bit. And I've definitely learned a lot, for sure.
Amazing. And what would your advice be to a writer working on their first book?
Again, it's look at it it's hard, because I'd say always write with the payoff for the reader in mind. You're going to build a story. If you're going to build a story, make sure that the payoff's worth it, because there's so many books that you can read where you're really invested in it, and then you get to the end and it's like, you know, it's the same with TV as well. I mean, like Line of Duty's just been on, and there's so many people that are kind of disappointed, and then there's other people that aren't as disappointed. So I suppose you can't always please everyone.
You're never going to please
You're never going to, and it's like that's the hard thing as well, is accepting that. But I think if you just kind of like write, if you've got like the story and you know where you want it to go, just make sure that that payoff is there at the end. But just be mindful when you may be going a little bit too long in a chapter or too long in one part, and trying to go, oh no, wait, don't really need that. I need to cut it back a bit. But it is hard. It is so hard, because when you love your characters so much, you want to
give their story justice.
Exactly. You want to give all of your characters the justice that they like deserve, and it's just about being mindful when you're doing that. But I'm not going to say it's easy, because it's not. It is really hard.
It is, but you know, and as I said, you know, you've got this beautiful spine now of, you know, it's the perfect book that you can read, perfect novel, and it's just so nice. It's nice to have it physically in your hand as well.
Definitely.
But that's it, and it's just a matter of, you know, knowing when to cut and when not to, you know, when to flower it up a bit and when not to. And it's, as you said, as a writer, you get invested in your own characters, but you also have to be always mindful that as much as we want to write for ourselves, we want the readers to, it's the readers, and it's that first time read for someone that's going to be the most important, really.
Exactly.
So that's, it's really important. Now I've got a couple of questions aside from the stars that guide you home, just to round up our lovely podcast. So if you were to write a spin-off about a side character, which would you pick?
Okay. This is hard. So what, one of my characters?
Yeah.
I'd really like to write Annalise's story, I think, because you get snippets of her story, but you don't really get the full picture. But the snippets, I think, are enough. A lot of people like Annalise as well, so I think those snippets are enough, because she comes from such a tough kind of,
you could tell there was a story
Yeah, there's definitely
tell.
a story there. So yeah, I think definitely Annalise. And I'm on the same point. You've got Tom, who's kind of been this wanderer all of his life,
Yeah.
and you kind of wonder how he kind of survived from, you know. So they've both kind of got these stories which are quite similar, which would be very interesting to look at. From a side perspective, yeah, definitely.
Perfect. And if you could spend a day with another popular author, who would you choose?
Jojo Moyes, because Me Before You, I've got one of my tattoos is a quote from Me Before You: "Just live well, just live." And I have met Jojo Moyes and showed her my tattoo, and she was like, "Oh my god, I get mum guilt now." She was like, "What have you done?" But yes, I did. I met her at the premiere for Me Before You, and she is lovely. But that Me Before You is one of the first books that ever made me full on sob, like my heart out, and I like that. I'm someone who wants my readers to kind of cry at my book. I'd love to spend time with her. Plus, I know she has like rescue dogs and horses and cats, and so I think we'd get on like really well because, yeah,
absolutely, yeah. And
she did send me she sent me an email once.
Really?
Because, well, I emailed her. It was whilst the film For Me Before You was out and stuff, and I emailed her and I said about doing my writing, and she gave me some really nice kind of advice and kind of good luck for writing. So yeah, that's definitely Jojo Moyes.
Amazing. And for anyone listening that doesn't know, Jemma so you volunteer at the Hull Animal Welfare?
I volunteer. I used to work there before I had to leave because of my ME. I couldn't do the shifts anymore. But I still volunteer there. I go and I sit with the dogs, or I take them on the paddock, or my specialism is feral kittens, or kittens that are semi-feral and need someone to go in and hold them and not be scared of being scratched too. But I don't mind doing that. They'll sit and hiss and spit at me, and I'm just like, oh, just pack it in. I'll just sit with them and calm them down. And it's such a nice feeling when you kind of see the progress that they've made from being this little hissy spitty thing in a corner to actually wanting to come and get cuddles and stuff. So but yeah, I generally go every Sunday with my mum, and we go and just spend some time there. So it's nice.
Amazing. No, that is lovely. And they're stocking your book as well?
They're stocking my book in the reception, because I will be donating a profit from the sales to Hull Animal Welfare, because they do incredible work. So just felt it was something I could do.
Absolutely. No, it's amazing cause, it really is. And just to end on, what's next, really? How is, what's next for author life? So have you got anything in the calendar, or where can our listeners find you on social media, purchase your book, anything like that?
So I'm on all social. I'm on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, either Jemma Robinson Author or Jemma Writes for Instagram and Twitter, and Jemma Robinson Author on Facebook. www.jemmarobinsonwrites.co.uk is my website where you can get my book from, but it's also available Waterstones online and numerous other book sellers online. Hopefully Waterstones in Hull are going to be stocking some physical copies as well. I'm hoping to get in touch with Hull libraries to do something, hopefully COVID permitting, a little bit later in the year. And I'm also hoping to be at one of the book fairs with the Lincolnshire authors page, who I was involved in when they did the World Book Day.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to be at one of those bit later in the year, maybe the Christmas one, I think. So I haven't quite decided yet, but one of the ones later in the year. I've just sent you guys my first manuscript, so the one that I wrote before The Stars That Guide You Home. That's another potential one that's in the pipeline. That's a fantasy novel. And then in this head there's some sort of circus going on, which I'm still trying to get my head around, but a circus story is in the works somewhere in here.
Wow,
we'll see,
that sounds exciting.
we'll see what happens. Like I say,
Yeah.
I've got the ending, so I will get there, but it's just when I'll get there. It's just, yeah, we'll see. But yeah, it's an interesting story that I've got, and from the bits my friends have read in the particular order, they think it's another good one. So we'll see how we go.
That sounds amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jemma, for your time. And it's been lovely speaking with you. And everyone, stay tuned for what's coming next.
Yeah, definitely.